Agatha Raisin and the deadly Frosty Farewell. Good evening, dear friends, and welcome back to the Detective Notebook. Tonight, we once again slip into the charming but never peaceful village of Carsely, tucked deep in the rolling Cotswolds. Tell me in the comments, where are you listening from, and what time is it for you right now? And tell us, did you like our stories? I love seeing your suggestions that will help our channel to grow. Before we begin, feel free to tap the like button and subscribe, only if this kind of cozy chaos is your cup of tea. It truly helps the channel grow and keeps these mysteries coming your way. Now, settle in, dim the lights, and grab a cup of tea, because tonight again we are going to steps into Agatha's world.
Chapter 1. Toast, Temper, and Two Disapproving Cats. Agatha Raisin woke to Frost scribbling lacework across her cottage windows, the sort of delicate beauty that felt personally designed to irritate her. Winter mornings in Carsely had a way of pretending to be charming while quietly numbing one's extremities. She swung out of bed, assessed herself in the mirror, and decided she looked perfectly acceptable for a woman of distinction who had slept slightly crooked on one pillow. That settled, she pulled on her dressing gown and marched downstairs with purpose and faint resentment. The kettle went on first, always first. Agatha believed coffee should be strong enough to make decisions for you, and she spooned grounds into her mug until the aroma alone felt capable of stripping wallpaper. Toast followed, golden, crisp, and buttered so sparingly she could later claim, with integrity, that it was basically dry. She took a satisfying sip and exhaled. Civilization restored, briefly. Hodge and Boswell appeared at her ankles, summoned by instinct and entitlement. Agatha reached for the new festive cat bowls, red with holly leaves, and immediately regretted the purchase. Hodge sniffed his bowl and recoiled as if insulted. Boswell stared at it, then at Agatha with theatrical disappointment. They were on sale, Agatha said defensively, and it's the thought that counts. The cats remained unmoved. She poured the food anyway. Boswell ate reluctantly. Hodge glared between mouthfuls. Outside, the garden lay stiff and silvered, every blade of grass rimmed with frost. The rose bushes looked wounded. The bird bath wore a thin skin of ice. Agatha stood at the window, coffee warming her hands, and felt that peculiar winter quiet pressing close. Somewhere down the lane, a van door slammed. Voices drifted faintly, cheerful, busy, conspiratorial. Carsely was awake. Carsely was talking. She narrowed her eyes. "Farewell party, apparently," came Mrs. Bloxby's voice, carried crisply through the cold. Such a shame, just when she was settling in. Agatha's jaw tightened. Celia Montague, glamorous newcomer, perfect hair, effortless smiles, and a wardrobe that suggested she never worried about radiators or sensible shoes. The village had taken to her embarrassingly speed, admired her far too easily. Agatha felt the sting before she could stop it, sharp and irritating as frostbite. "Good riddance," she muttered, though she wasn't sure she meant it. Hodge suddenly hissed at the window. Boswell joined him, fur puffed, staring at nothing Agatha could see. She frowned. "Don't be ridiculous," she told them, though unease crept in anyway. The glass felt colder than it should, the garden too still, and Celia leaving, so suddenly, so theatrically, didn't quite sit right. Admiration rarely soured overnight. Someone outside laughed, but it sounded thin, stretched. Agatha straightened, smoothed her hair, and reached for her coat. Whatever Celia Montague was leaving behind, Carsely wouldn't stay quiet for long, and Agatha Raisin, irritation firmly in place, intended to find out why.
The air outside bit sharply at Agatha Raisin's cheeks as she walked toward the village green, her breath puffing like an irritated steam engine. Frost crackled underfoot, and Carsely had arranged itself into its winter pose. Picturesque cottages, faint chimney smoke, and villagers bundled in scarves that suggested cheer while concealing grievance. Agatha pulled her coat tighter and reminded herself that she looked perfectly striking in winter black. Anyone who thought otherwise needed their eyes tested. The post office was busy.
which was never a good sign. It meant gossip had ripened. Agatha joined the short queue, ears alert. Mrs. Witherspoon was already mid-sentence, her smile stretched so thin it could have sliced bread. "Of course we'll all miss Celia terribly," she said, voice dripping honey. "Such a loss for the village." "Will we?" Agatha murmured, earning a sharp look. Mrs. Witherspoon recovered instantly. "Oh, Agatha, there you are. We were just talking about the farewell party, Friday evening. So thoughtful of Celia to host one before she goes." "So sudden," Agatha said mildly. "I thought she adored village life, all that fresh air." "Adoration." A pause followed. Someone coughed. Mrs. Blocksby fluttered her hands. "Well, you know how these things are. Opportunities arise, especially for someone like Celia." Her gaze slid briefly to Agatha's coat, then away. Envy crackled softly, like ice under pressure. Outside, on the green, a small knot of women stood, comparing scarves and pretending not to measure one another. Celia's name floated between them, cushioned in compliments that sounded memorized. So glamorous, such confidence, men simply adore her. The last remark was followed by brittle laughter. Agatha raised an eyebrow. Romantic entanglements, then. That explained the tension. Nothing unsettled Carsely, quite like a woman admired too openly. "She said she's moving abroad," Mrs. Harper added, as though offering proof. "Something about a fresh start." "Did she?" Agatha said. "She told me London, business reasons." She watched the reactions closely. Faces flickered too fast. Inconsistencies, then. Interesting. The postman emerged, stamping his feet, and held out an envelope. "For you, Agatha." The paper was thick, cream-colored, expensive. Her name was written in elegant looping script. Agatha frowned. Celia's handwriting, unmistakably. She slipped a finger under the seal and unfolded the card. "Dear Agatha, I do hope you can join us for a small farewell gathering this Friday evening. It would mean a great deal." That was all. Polite, correct, utterly impersonal. No warmth, no joke. Agatha felt a prickle of irritation. Either Celia didn't want her there at all, or wanted her there very badly, for reasons she hadn't bothered to explain. "Well," Mrs. Witherspoon prompted, "an invitation, I expect." "Yes," Agatha said crisply. "How kind." She tucked the card into her coat pocket, already annoyed. She disliked being managed. She disliked mystery even more when it involved good stationery. As she turned to leave, she caught her reflection in the post-office window, composed, observant, slightly flushed from the cold. Vanity stirred reassuringly. She looked better than half of them anyway. Let Celia Montague have her admirers. Agatha had survived worse rivals than a woman with glossy hair and dubious motives. She stepped back onto the green, frost gleaming pale in the weak winter sun, and checked the date again, Friday evening, the coldest night of the week, according to the forecast pinned in the shop window. Agatha paused, a faint unease settling in her stomach. Farewells, she thought, were never quite as simple as people pretended, and something about this one felt dangerously cold.
Chapter 2. Ice, Illusions, and a Very Cold Discovery. Celia Montague's cottage glowed like a magazine spread dropped accidentally into Carsely. Fairy lights twinkled with calculated warmth, the windows steamed invitingly, and the scent of expensive candles battled bravely against the cold night air. Agatha paused at the gate, adjusted her scarf, and told herself firmly that she had every right to be there. The cats would have agreed had they not been at home judging her shoes. Inside, champagne flowed with unsettling generosity. Crystal glasses chimed, laughter rose and fell on cue, and everyone seemed determined to prove how very fond they all were of Celia. Agatha accepted a glass and immediately noted that the smiles didn't quite reach anyone's eyes. Compliments landed too quickly, too brightly, like rehearsed lines. "Darling Celia," cooed Mrs. Harper, "we simply won't know what to do without you." "Yes," added Mrs. Witherspoon,
tight-lipped. "The village will feel terribly dull." Agatha sipped her champagne and thought that was precisely the point. She scanned the room. Subtle rivalries glittered beneath the fairy lights, women standing a fraction too close to their husbands, glances sharpened by comparison. Celia floated between them all, slim, elegant, and infuriatingly at ease, or pretending to be. Jealousy crackled faintly, like ice shifting on a pond. Celia herself approached Agatha with a smile that was quick, almost anxious. "I'm so glad you came," she said, gripping her glass as though it might escape. "It means such a lot." "Does it?" Agatha replied lightly. "Or is this the sort of thing one says at farewell parties?" She laughed a beat too late. "Perhaps both." Her gaze flicked toward the back door, then returned. "It's just time for a fresh start. Everyone keeps saying that, usually when they're desperate to leave." Another flicker, fear this time, gone almost at once. Celia smoothed her dress, perfection restored. "Oh, I wouldn't say desperate, just ready." Agatha nodded, filing the reaction away. Around them, conversation buzzed. Someone mentioned Celia's career success, someone else her travels. A third commented loudly on how lucky Celia was to inspire such admiration. The word hung oddly in the air. Agatha suppressed a smile. If envy were heat, the cottage would have melted the frost outside. She drifted toward the food table, enduring small talk about weather, roads, and how marvelous Celia's taste was. "You must be exhausted," said a woman brightly. "Packing, organizing, farewells." Celia smiled again, brittle now. "Yes, it's been a lot." Agatha watched her fingers tremble as she set down her glass. Nervous indeed. This was not the glow of someone embarking on a grand adventure. It was the taut politeness of someone bracing themselves. A man Agatha barely recognized leaned in to murmur something to Celia. She stiffened, nodded, and excused herself, heading toward the garden door. Agatha frowned. Starting over, perhaps, but from what? She glanced around once more. The champagne bubbled, the fairy lights twinkled, compliments continued to rain down, increasingly hollow. Beneath it all, a chill threaded through the room, sharper than the winter air outside. Agatha took another sip, eyes narrowing thoughtfully. Farewell parties, she reflected, were supposed to be joyful. This one felt like a performance, and Celia Montague looked like an actress waiting nervously for the curtain to fall. At first, no one noticed Celia was gone. Her absence slipped neatly into the rhythm of the party, disguised as dramatic timing. Someone joked that she was probably composing a final sentimental moment in the garden. Another guest rolled their eyes and said, "Typical," with affectionate exasperation that sounded anything but. Laughter followed, light and brittle, clinking against the glasses. Agatha noticed. She had been watching the garden door with the instincts of a woman who trusted patterns more than people. Celia had gone out quickly, coat half-buttoned, scarf looped carelessly around her neck. That had been several minutes ago, perhaps longer. Agatha checked her watch and felt irritation prick. Hosts did not vanish at their own farewell parties. It was rude, or deliberate. "She does like an entrance," Mrs. Witherspoon said, smiling thinly. "Or an exit," Agatha replied. She set down her glass. "I'll fetch her before she catches her death of cold." No one objected. If anything, there was relief. Agatha pushed open the back door and stepped into the garden. The cold struck immediately, sharp and clean, slicing through the warmth clinging to her coat. Frost glimmered over the lawn, silvered and deceptively peaceful. The fairy lights ended abruptly at the door, leaving the garden dim, moonlit and still. "Celia," Agatha called, her voice sounding louder than she intended. She moved carefully, heels crunching softly on the frozen grass. The shed loomed at the far end, its dark shape edged with white. She took another step and stopped. Celia lay near the shed door, arranged almost gently on her side, hands folded as though in sleep, her hair fanned neatly across the frost. For a split second, Agatha thought she was sleeping. Then she saw the unnatural stillness, the way the cold had already claimed her color. Agatha's breath caught. "Oh," she said quietly. "Oh no." She forced herself closer, heart thudding with a steadiness that surprised her. Shock did not scream. It settled heavily like snow. Celia's eyes were closed. Her expression was peaceful, too peaceful. Agatha noticed details with unwanted clarity, the disturbed frost where footprints overlapped and vanished, the absence of the scarf Celia had worn moments before. The air carried a faint, wrong scent beneath the winter sharpness, something chemical, almost sweet. "This isn't right," Agatha murmured. Behind her the door opened. A woman gasped. Someone screamed. The garden filled suddenly with noise and light, voices tumbling over one another, shock rippling outward like a crack in ice. Coats were pulled tighter. Hands flew to mouths. Someone whispered, "She's dead," as if volume might alter reality. Agatha straightened slowly. Her irritation was gone, replaced by a cold, focused calm. This was no accident. Celia Montague had not simply wandered out and succumbed to the weather. Someone had placed her here. Someone wanted this image. Serene, final, unchallenging. The party dissolved into confusion. Glasses were abandoned. Guests clustered, murmuring, glancing at one another with new, sharp suspicion. No one admitted to having seen Celia last. No one remembered exactly when she'd gone outside. Alibis formed instinctively, overlapping and vague. Agatha stepped back, the frost crunching softly beneath her shoe. Farewell indeed, she thought grimly. This goodbye had been carefully planned. As the cold deepened and silence crept back into the garden, one thought settled uncomfortably in her mind. Someone in this village hadn't just wanted Celia to leave. They wanted her farewell to be permanent.
Chapter 3. Tea, Tension, and the First Thin Cracks. Agatha Raisin returned to her cottage with a sense of purposeful exhaustion, cheeks flushed from the cold and mind humming with unanswered questions. The door creaked behind her, and Hodge and Boswell emerged from their respective vantage points, the windowsill and the rug, casting what Agatha could only describe as two very disappointed looks at her coat. I know, she said, tugging off her gloves. "It's not perfect. The shoulders might droop. Yes, I looked like a small, slightly damp penguin outside. But you survive the frost. You get judged later." Hodge meowed accusingly, Boswell blinked slowly, and Agatha poured herself a large cup of coffee, the steam curling like a theatrical curtain. The cats sniffed at her fingers, then at the saucer of biscuits she had left for them out of habit, and returned to their silent critique. Settling into her favorite armchair, Agatha opened the window just enough to let in the crisp morning air. Carsely was alive with gossip already. Voices carried from the neighboring cottages, drifting over the frost like a warning. The news had spread. Celia Montague's death had become the only topic anyone could discuss without embarrassment. Mrs. Blocksby's voice, high and precise, floated across the hedge. "I said it. I told you. How could someone leave her like that?" "Oh, nonsense," countered another voice, lower, sardonic. "Perhaps she staged it herself. Some people love a dramatic exit." Agatha sipped her coffee and sighed. Dramatic, yes, but rehearsed? That was the word. Every detail, the garden, the lights, the scarf now missing, felt like a performance. Celia had curated her own farewell as if it were a scene in a play, and now someone had improvised upon it. Her mind wandered through the village map of suspects. Darcy Somerville might have wished her gone. Darcy's subtle competitiveness could sour in a heartbeat. Mr. Pritchard, the quietly resentful neighbor, had always made remarks about outsiders flaunting themselves in Carsely. And, of course, there were the usual parade of social rivals, women who measured themselves against Celia's effortless charm, resenting her for no reason other than her perfection. Hodge leapt onto her lap, demanding attention. Boswell flicked his tail as if to say, "Really, this is all very trivial, isn't it?" Agatha rubbed Hodge's ears absent-mindedly, letting the absurdity of the situation wash over her. Gossip, she reflected, was a peculiar form of theater. Everyone performed, everyone judged, and the audience never left. She jotted a few notes in her notebook, mostly observations and half-formed suspicions. "Rehearsed a farewell," she murmured, underlining it. "Someone benefited." Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden rapping on the window. A neighbor, Mrs. Harper, peeked in, breath fogging the glass. "Agatha, you're in on the discussion, I assume? Did you notice anything peculiar about the night?" Agatha raised an eyebrow. "Peculiar? Only that someone thought it sensible to place a woman's body in the frost with such theatrical precision." Mrs. Harper gasped and quickly retreated. Agatha sipped her coffee, letting the warmth settle her nerves. The village had a way of exploding minor details into grand theories, and she knew she would need to separate absurd conjecture from facts. Still, the question nagged: who had orchestrated the coldest goodbye of all, and why? For now, Hodge and Boswell's judgmental eyes and the comfort of her cozy cottage would have to suffice. But Agatha Raisin, irritated, curious, and surprisingly alert, knew she was already beginning to trace the threads of a mystery that was only just revealing itself. Agatha Raisin settled into the slightly stiff armchair at the village tea-room, the scent of freshly baked scones and strong Earl Grey enveloping her like a warm, slightly damp blanket. Hodge would have approved of the table's proximity to the radiator. Boswell, if present, would have judged her for not bringing biscuits exclusively for the cats. Agatha ignored these mental protests. There were more pressing matters. Celia Montague's sudden, unnerving death. The first interview was Mrs. Witherspoon, whose cheeks were pink from the cold and from exertion in social etiquette. "I was in the kitchen most of the evening arranging the canapés," she declared, eyes flicking briefly toward the window as though to ensure no one else had wandered outside. Her hands trembled just enough to betray nerves she tried to hide. "I barely noticed her step outside at all." "Alone?" Agatha asked, fingering her notebook. "No company?" "Of course not," Mrs. Witherspoon said, a fraction too quickly. "Why would she need company? She's capable, independent." Her smile cracked faintly. "Oh, how dreadful it all seems now." Agatha noted it down. Alibi number 1, neat, rehearsed, and too smooth. Noted also subtle jealousy under the surface. Mrs. Witherspoon had clearly resented Celia's effortless charm and influence. Next came Mrs. Harper, who perched primly with a cup of chamomile. "I was chatting with Margaret at the Green," she said. "We went over the invitations, again for clarity. Celia seemed, well, she seemed distracted." Agatha's pencil scratched the margin. Overlapping alibis. Both women's accounts covered each other's blind spots. Too convenient. The conversation turned toward money, courtesy of the village accountant, Mr. Pritchard. "There was a matter of a small fund Celia managed," he said, voice low. "Nothing scandalous, but she had control over contributions. Could someone have—" He trailed off, perhaps reconsidering. Agatha's gaze sharpened. Financial motive? Possible, but the faint unease told her this wasn't the full story. Emotional currents ran deeper. Agatha leaned back, sipped her tea, and observed. Jealousy pulsed quietly. Snide comments, withheld sympathy, fleeting looks of superiority. Mrs. Witherspoon muttered about how Celia always took what wasn't hers. Taken what? The remark wasn't explained. Was it love, attention, status, something more tangible, perhaps? But Agatha didn't press yet. Small talk continued. Frost outside, village preparations for the next festival, how thoroughly the cats judged their humans. Humor softened the tension, a reminder that life didn't entirely pivot around death and intrigue. Agatha made a mental note. The villagers were predictable in emotion, but unpredictable in honesty. By mid-afternoon, she had canvassed most of those present at the farewell. The alibis, each overlapping just enough to form a neat chain, felt deliberately aligned. One person's claim depended implicitly on another's truthfulness, and if one lied, a shiver ran down Agatha's spine. Not from cold this time. A single domino, one falsified story, and the entire network of defenses could crumble. She closed her notebook, her mind already calculating angles, timings, and personalities. Hodge purred from the windowsill, as though approving her cautious approach, while Boswell gave an indignant flick of the tail, signaling that patience would be tested. Agatha smiled faintly, considering the next step, discovering which of these polished, polite villagers had carefully engineered a chain of deception, and for what purpose. The teacups clinked around her. Steam drifted lazily into the chilly air. Outside, the frost clung stubbornly to the village green. One alibi, Agatha realized, depended entirely on another liar, and when that truth came to light, the fragile facade of civility would shatter. Chapter 4.
Snowdrifts, secrets, and social warfare. The village cafe smelled of strong coffee, baking bread, and just a hint of cinnamon from the spiced scones cooling on the counter. Agatha Raisin entered, scarf snug, boots dusted with snow, and immediately felt the familiar twinge of irritation. Grief in Carsely had a tendency to be performative. Everyone seemed determined to appear shocked, mournful, and entirely proper, all while keeping one eye on social positioning. She selected a corner table, sliding her coat off, and noted the villagers already clustered like chess pieces, their eyes sharp beneath carefully neutral expressions. "It's dreadful, simply dreadful," Mrs. Witherspoon murmured to no one in particular, casting a glance toward Agatha that was equal parts sympathy and subtle challenge. Agatha sipped her tea, amused. There was nothing like British grief to reveal social hierarchies. Nearby, Mrs. Harper offered condolences with a bright smile that felt brittle, the sort you might crack if handled too roughly. Celia well, she always made an impression, didn't she? Her words implied admiration, but her eyes, narrowed slightly, suggested envy simmering beneath civility. Agatha noted it with a sharp pencil of awareness. Humor, as always, persisted quietly in the background. Mr. Pritchard dropped his napkin, fumbled for it, and muttered, "I swear, even the frost is plotting," which earned a tiny snicker from the waitress and a restrained glare from Mrs. Bloxby. Agatha allowed herself a faint smile, considering that even tragedy could be punctuated by domestic absurdity. The conversation shifted inevitably towards Celia herself. Agatha listened as women subtly rewrote the narrative, Celia as manipulative, as someone who always took the spotlight, as the sort of person who could inspire admiration and resentment in equal measure. Each anecdote, polished for effect, painted Celia as a provocateur, a woman skilled in eliciting envy while appearing innocent. Agatha stirred her tea slowly, watching faces. There was a pattern emerging, like frost on a window pane, jealousy mirrored in politeness, competition disguised as concern. The village, it seemed, was a stage, and Celia had been the unwitting, or perhaps deliberate, star. And then the tension thickened, a subtle exchange over a man no one admitted to wanting, a blush, a sidelong glance, an innocent question about gardening tools, all carefully designed to conceal fascination and rivalry. Agatha noted it with a sharp pencil of awareness. Hodge and Boswell would have approved, if only in theory, of her observation skills. In their absence, she allowed herself a dry internal comment. At least someone in this village knows how to judge properly. She glanced around the cafe again, noting small details. Mrs. Witherspoon's hands tight around her teacup, the way Mr. Pritchard's tie had twisted slightly, Mrs. Harper's foot tapping just below the table. Everything a signal, every polite gesture hiding something more potent. Agatha sipped the last of her tea and considered her own role. She was here, ostensibly to mourn, but primarily to observe, to measure, to parse what lay beneath performative grief. Celia's charm, her subtle provocations, her capacity to inspire envy had left traces even in death, like footprints in the frost. And the unanswered question lingered, faint and persistent. Was Celia cruel by design, or merely the victim of collective envy? As the cafe buzzed softly around her, Agatha felt the thrill of discovery, tempered by social caution. Somewhere in the polite smiles and quiet cruelty was a clue, a thread she could follow. And someone, she suspected, loved Celia in secret, though no one would admit it. The quiet observation of that truth, she knew, might be the key to understanding the deadly farewell. Agatha Raisin returned to Celia Montague's garden mid-morning, the frost still clinging stubbornly to the grass and garden beds. The air had a crystalline sharpness, the kind that made noses pink and cheeks sting pleasantly. She tugged her scarf tighter, muttering theatrically at the cold. Honestly, if winter were a person, I'd have punched it by now. Hodge and Boswell were absent, which meant she had no audience for her curses. A pity, as they would have approved of the dramatic flair.
She stepped carefully over the frost-laden grass, boots crunching underfoot, and nearly found herself horizontal when an icy patch betrayed her. "Blast it all!" she shouted, gripping a low fence, cheeks burning. Passers-by would have called it a minor accident. Agatha called it heroic reconnaissance. Her eyes swept over the garden with professional precision, noting immediately the subtle disruptions in the frost. Footprints that didn't align with the evening's paths, impressions where someone had paused too long, and, most intriguing, areas of crushed patterns that suggested weight and movement. Whoever had handled Celia's farewell had been methodical. The shed loomed, its wooden frame stark against the winter light. Agatha circled it, noticing a door slightly ajar, hinges faintly greased but recently disturbed. Something had been removed. Something essential. The ground nearby bore scuff marks, the frost disturbed unevenly. She crouched, finger tracing a faint indentation in the soil. She murmured. Someone knew exactly where to tread. Nearby, garden tools lay scattered unnaturally, some upright, others tipped, as if moved deliberately for effect. Agatha shook her head. The meticulous staging, down to Celia's folded hands, was intended to create calm, yet small details betrayed chaos, hints of hurried activity under the serene facade. She paused by the shed door, scanning the surrounding beds. Frost clung to the petals of the late-season blooms, glittering unnaturally, as though the garden itself had observed the night's events and retained its memory. Agatha crouched, running gloved fingers over the ground. A faint chemical scent lingered. Vanilla, or perhaps something stronger, mingled with the icy air. The thought made her pause. Not strong enough to alert immediately, but distinct enough to hint at intention. Her thoughts were interrupted by another slip, this time into a soft mound of snow near the hedge. "Confound it all!" she cried, regaining her footing with a flourish. "Winter, I despise you, but you make excellent comedic relief." She dusted herself off, ignoring the possibility of snow in her coat lining. Returning her attention to the shed, Agatha's eyes landed on something small yet oddly out of place near the hinges. A fragment of ribbon, delicate, silken, not belonging to any known decoration in the garden. Her mind ticked. Was it part of Celia's attire? A signifier of someone else's involvement? A clue staged to mislead? For a moment, the garden felt alive, whispering secrets through its frost-cracked soil and carefully positioned tools. Agatha inhaled sharply. This place, these meticulously arranged details held answers. They would demand patience, observation, and a sharp mind. A breakthrough ignited in her thoughts. The misplaced tools, the disturbed frost, the absent object from the shed, and the silken fragment. They were pieces of a puzzle deliberately left in plain sight, yet how they fit together remained tantalizingly unclear. Someone had manipulated the garden with knowledge of the terrain, of Celia's habits, and perhaps of the village's tendency to gossip. Agatha straightened, gloved hands on her hips, and surveyed the scene once more. "All right," she said softly, her breath misting in the cold air. "Someone here knows this garden intimately. And if I can trace that knowledge, then perhaps I can understand who orchestrated the coldest farewell of all." The garden waited, serene and silent, yet brimming with whispered secrets, each frost-cracked footprint a question demanding an answer. Chapter 5. Red Herrings, Romantic Regrets, and Rising Doubt. Agatha Raisin sat by the kitchen window, Hodge perched on the sill, Boswell curled on the armchair beside her, both casting judgmental eyes as if she were about to confess a serious crime instead of brooding over past mistakes. The winter sunlight glinted off frost-laced rooftops, and the village beyond seemed picturesque, peaceful, and maddeningly indifferent to her emotional turmoil. She sipped her coffee, strong enough to strip wallpaper, and allowed her thoughts to drift. Not to Celia's death, not immediately, but to a sting that had nothing to do with frost or murder. James Lacey. His name, long buried under polite distance and unspoken regrets, had wormed its way into her consciousness during the chaos of the farewell party. The reminder felt like a mild electric shock, and she grumbled quietly, "Of course, in comes Celia Montague, and suddenly my own past mistakes are glaringly obvious." Hodge yawned, tail flicking, as if to say, "You really must stop this nonsense and feed me." Boswell blinked slowly, undeterred, his judgment palpable. "Still obsessing over men, are we?" Agatha muttered, "At least someone in this house appreciates sophistication," and poured a second cup, noting the irony. Celia Montague. Every time Agatha recalled her, she saw a reflection of herself, bold, witty, unapologetic, but refined in ways Agatha had only ever attempted. Charm, laughter, effortless conversation. Celia wielded it like armor. But what was she protecting? Agatha sipped her coffee and imagined the farewell party once more. The brittle smiles, the careful gestures, the subtle tremors of anxiety beneath polished composure. Fear, perhaps, or a knowledge that admiration could turn sour in an instant. Humor, as always, offered reprieve. She pictured herself at the party, offering awkward small talk, hoping no one noticed she had mispronounced a French word, and Hodge's silent, scornful stare, Boswell's eyelids drooping in pity. It occurred to her that Celia had survived the evening far more gracefully than she would have. She smirked, despite the sting of jealousy. "Damn her," she murmured, and added softly, "and I mean it with affection." Agatha's mind drifted back to James Lacey briefly. She had imagined, over the years, the conversations she might have had, the confessions left unsaid, the moments left unclaimed. And then Celia's presence intruded again, brilliant, confident, and untouchable. Her reflection in the fairy-lit garden had mirrored the bravado Agatha herself had once mustered, yet with fewer scars showing. As she pondered, a faint unease crept in. Celia's bravado, her charm, her carefully measured smiles, they were not merely tools for social success. They were shields. Shields from judgment, from enemies hidden behind polite compliments, from something only she knew. Agatha realized that admiration often concealed something deeper. Fear. Yes, fear, but fear of what? The question lodged in her mind like a shard of ice. Hodge padded to her lap, seeking attention, and she absently scratched behind her ears. Boswell stretched elegantly, a silent reminder that judgment never rested. Agatha chuckled, shaking herself at herself. If these cats can see the truth, so can I. And I will. Her thoughts returned to the farewell, to the garden, to the subtle movements and whispered rivalries. Celia Montague had left too neatly, too carefully, but she had also left clues, emotional fingerprints Agatha could almost trace. The bravado, the charm, the fear, it all pointed towards someone or something that had frightened Celia. And Agatha Raisin, stubborn, curious, and irritatingly perceptive, intended to find out precisely who or what it had been. The sun climbed higher, frost glinting stubbornly, as Agatha sipped her coffee and considered her next move. Between old feelings, older mistakes, and a cold case growing colder by the hour, she resolved to untangle the threads, one sharp observation at a time.
The village library was quiet, save for the soft scratch of pen on paper and the occasional whisper as Agatha Raisin set about interviewing yet another resident. Frost outside coated the windows like sugar, the winter sun glinting weakly on the panes. Hodge and Boswell were absent, leaving her to rely entirely on her own wits and an inner monologue that alternated between dry humor and irritation. Mr. Pritchard shuffled nervously into her makeshift interrogation corner, a copy of the Carsely Gazette tucked under one arm. His spectacles perched precariously on the bridge of his nose, and his hands fidgeted with a fountain pen that was clearly more decorative than useful. "Agatha," he began, clearing his throat, I suppose I should confess something." "Go on," Agatha prompted, trying to hide a twitch of anticipation. "I argued with Celia," he admitted, voice low, almost fearful. "Nothing major, a dispute about accounts, contributions, the fund she managed. She was insistent, and I may have raised my voice, but I swear I had nothing to do with this." He gestured vaguely, eyes wide, as if even mentioning the word murder might summon it. Agatha raised an eyebrow. Humor tickled at the corners of her mind, the scene of the civilized accountant practically trembling under polite suspicion. "Accounts and arguments, Mr. Pritchard," she said dryly, "quite the tempest in a teacup." Yet the confession was useful, even if incomplete. It redirected suspicion, layered the motives, and hinted at tensions that were more emotional than financial. She noted it in her book. Mr. Pritchard, guilt over argument, possible misdirection, emotional vulnerability. "Where were you during the farewell?" she asked casually, sipping her tea. "In the kitchen, mostly, overseeing canapes. Mrs. Witherspoon can vouch. We didn't see her go outside." Agatha nodded, filing the overlap away. Alibis were crisscrossed, rehearsed, almost mechanical. Yet in Mr. Pritchard's confession she detected a subtle tremor, an emotional fingerprint that didn't belong to the body of lies surrounding it. As they spoke, something caught her eye on the table. Celia's scarf, the one missing from the garden. Someone had returned it, but not neatly. It was crumpled, slightly damp, and smelled faintly of chemicals. Altered evidence. Deliberate? Probably. She made a mental note. Whoever returned the scarf wanted the impression of completion without resolving the mystery. "Interesting choice," Agatha murmured, lifting the scarf and letting the fibers drift through her fingers. Either a careless return or a message. Mr. Pritchard looked puzzled. A message? Agatha smiled thinly. "We'll see." She closed her notebook and leaned back. The confession clarified some threads but left others knotted. Emotions, jealousy, fear, they all swirled around her like frost-laden fog. Someone in Carsely had skillfully manipulated appearances, knowledge, and timing. The body, the farewell, the altered scarf, it was all part of a carefully choreographed puzzle. And then she noticed it, a subtle shift in Mr. Pritchard's posture, a flicker in his eyes when she mentioned the scarf. Not guilt, not yet, but recognition, awareness. That small, involuntary reaction, almost imperceptible, was a clue in itself. Agatha's pulse quickened, not from fear, but from the familiar thrill of discovery. Beneath rehearsed confessions, polite lies, and social camouflage, someone's emotional fingerprint was visible. It was precise, deliberate, and telling. Agatha tucked the scarf into her coat pocket, already planning her next steps. Someone had left their mark, and Agatha Raisin, as ever, intended to read it. Outside, the frost clung stubbornly to the village, glittering in the weak sunlight. The mystery had deepened, the suspects tangled further, and the game was far from over. And for the first time that morning, Agatha felt she was closing in on the truth, even if only just.
Chapter 6. Cracks in the Ice. Agatha Raisin settled into her study, the two cats observing her from the windowsill and armchair as if preparing to judge her methodology. Hodge flicked a tail with deliberate disdain. Boswell blinked slowly, a silent critique of her lack of proper organization. Agatha ignored them, balancing a steaming mug of coffee in one hand and a notebook in the other. The frost outside painted the village rooftops a sparkling white, but inside her thoughts were far less serene. She spread a series of crude charts and scribbles across the desk, timelines, snippets of gossip, conflicting alibis, and observations from the farewell party. Colored pens littered the desk like confetti from a poorly executed festival. "Hodge, Boswell," she muttered, "note-taking is serious work, not that you'd understand." Hodge yawned audibly. Boswell shifted, tail flicking with pointed judgment. Agatha sighed, remembering why cats were both comforting and infuriating companions. Patterns began to emerge. Jealousy was not the work of a single rival. It rippled throughout the village. Darcy Somerville, Mrs. Harper, Mrs. Witherspoon, and even quiet, seemingly insignificant figures had all displayed subtle envy towards Celia Montague. Each had a motive, and yet none had appeared overtly capable of cold, calculated murder. The question loomed: who had the patience, cunning, and nerve to turn envy into action? Humor, as always, lightened the gloom. She imagined Celia's farewell party in miniature, reenacted with Hodge and Boswell as the guests. Hodge scowled at a tiny paper Celia. Boswell hissed dramatically when a makeshift champagne glass teetered. Agatha chuckled, the absurdity reminding her that even in crime-solving, some levity was required. Returning to the charts, Agatha considered the method of death. The scene had been peaceful, almost staged, like a carefully composed portrait. Not violence of passion, not hasty rage, but something quiet, precise, and deliberate. someone underestimated by the village, the capable, the silent, the observer who hid in plain sight, the person no one would suspect. That was the angle she needed to explore. She jotted notes rapidly, diagrams intersecting like frost cracks on the garden paths. Quiet, capable, underestimated, emotional motive, timing, knowledge of garden. Patterns layered over one another, revealing a lattice of opportunity and intent. A hint of a grin tugged at her lips, detective satisfaction, tempered by the cold reminder of stakes. The cats intervened in typical fashion. Hodge pawed at the notebook, scattering half a dozen crucial notes across the floor. "Thank you," she said dryly, retrieving them. "Really, your timing is impeccable." Boswell, unimpressed, settled back into judgmental silence, leaving her to continue mapping envy, pride, and polite duplicity across the village. Her mind returned to the farewell party, to the carefully orchestrated smiles, the brittle compliments, and the overlapping alibis. The culprit had woven themselves into the village fabric so tightly that the deception was nearly invisible. And yet Agatha had found the faint signature, the quiet pride, the polished politeness, the subtle manipulation. Whoever had orchestrated Celia's demise had done so with care, and underestimated few except the one observer willing to see patterns where others saw chaos. She leaned back, coffee cooling in her hand, and allowed herself a small, dry laugh. "Hiding in plain sight," she muttered. "Classic mistake, overlooked because we expect the quiet, competent ones to remain invisible." Outside, frost glittered insistently, mirroring her own sharpening clarity. Agatha Raisin was closing in. Somewhere beneath the village's polite exteriors, behind laughter and tea, was the person who turned envy into action, and she intended to find them before another thread was lost to the cold.
The village hall was bathed in late afternoon light, filtered through frost-speckled windows, the wooden floorboards creaking under careful footsteps. Agatha Raisin stood near the back, notebook in hand, while the residents of Carsely gathered for a deliberately casual reconstruction meeting, a polite term for what everyone understood would be probing questions and awkward scrutiny. Hodge and Boswell were safely at home, presumably judging her absence with acerbic precision. Agatha's sharp eyes scanned the room, cataloging expressions, body language, and micro-reactions. Everyone appeared calm, smiles polite, voices measured, but her experience told her otherwise. Lies, she knew, had a texture you could feel if you paid close attention, tension in the shoulders, avoidance of eye contact, vocal pitches rising and falling unpredictably. The first moment of disruption arrived almost imperceptibly. Mr. Pritchard, previously so careful and composed in his denials, made a minor misstatement while describing where he had been the night of Celia's death. A detail contradicted Mrs. Witherspoon's earlier account. The discrepancy was subtle, a misplaced timeline, an unnecessary emphasis, but enough to make Agatha's pulse quicken. "Excuse me," she said lightly, pointing toward the contradiction. "Could you clarify your movements around 9 o'clock? You mentioned returning from the garden before Mrs. Witherspoon, but she noted something different." Mr. Pritchard stiffened, adjusting his spectacles, lips pressing into a thin line. "Well, yes, but that's not relevant." "Oh, but it is," Agatha replied, with her customary blend of dry wit and sharp observation. "Timing is everything when it comes to frost, footprints, and farewell parties. Don't you agree?" The room shifted imperceptibly. Murmurs rose and fell, polite coughs punctuating the tension. Mrs. Witherspoon's hand tightened around her teacup. Darcy Somerville's smile flickered, eyes narrowing ever so slightly. Other villagers exchanged glances, noticing something had changed, but not quite comprehending the pivot. Agatha watched the micro-signs, a gulp, a trembling finger, a sudden clearing of the throat. She had seen guilt before, not always in words, often in tone, in small instinctive tells. And now she saw it clearly. One person in this room had been protecting themselves through careful deception, and their mask had cracked. A small, victorious smirk tugged at her lips, tempered immediately with patience. There was no need to rush. The truth was visible. She could see it in the subtle rise and fall of the guilty party's chest, the way their voice wavered despite the polished facade. Exposure now would scatter the threads. Better to wait. Hodge would have approved. Boswell doubtless would have reminded her to act decisively. Agatha considered their imagined criticism with wry amusement, making a mental note to consult them later. Meanwhile, outside, frost glimmered stubbornly, unchanged by human drama. Inside, the hall hummed with polite tension. Agatha's notebook was filled with annotations, sketches of movement, and notes on voice patterns. The alibi had collapsed publicly, and with it the carefully maintained web of deception. Yet she remained silent, letting the room digest the subtle fracture. Curiosity, observation, and patience were her allies. The truth was visible in everything but confession, and Agatha understood why restraint was vital. To act now would be to scatter evidence, to disrupt the careful unraveling that would yield a complete picture. She closed her notebook gently and allowed herself a small, self-satisfied sigh. The truth was there. She could see it, smell it in the subtle tension, feel it in the frost-laden afternoon air, and she would wait. Because someone in Carsely had left their emotional fingerprint too delicately to ignore, and when the time came, Agatha Raisin would ensure it was read correctly.
Chapter 7. The Frost Finally Breaks. Agatha Raisin arranged for the village hall to host a final discussion about Celia Montague's farewell, a pretense of closure, though anyone with half an eye could see it was a summoning of suspects. The frost outside glittered like shards of glass in the weak winter sunlight, reflecting the tension about to unfold inside. Hodge and Boswell were left at home, presumably judging her sense of theater, which Agatha imagined as critical yet approving. She arrived early, dragging a folding chair into the center of the hall, dusting imaginary frost from the seat, and adjusting her scarf with theatrical precision. "One must set the stage correctly," she muttered, glancing at the rows of chairs for the assembled villagers. They trickled in, faces polite but edged with curiosity and dread. Darcy Somerville first, followed by Mrs. Witherspoon, Mrs. Harper, Mr. Pritchard, and a scattering of others who had attended Celia's farewell. "Thank you all for coming," Agatha began, voice lilting with dry charm. "We are here not only to commemorate Celia, of course, but also to clarify a few inconsistencies. Consider this a gentle exploration of truth rather than a formal inquisition." She let the words hang, letting tension curl through the room like smoke from a hidden fire. A ripple of nervous smiles passed through the group. Agatha gestured dramatically to her notebook, now opened on the table before her. "We have had whispers of jealousy, murmurs of fear, and a dash of resentment. None of us are without flaw, and that, my friends, is where motives often hide." Humor punctuated the scene naturally. Darcy adjusted her gloves mid-sentence, muttering under her breath about frostbitten fingers, eliciting a quiet snort from a nearby villager. Agatha's inner commentary offered more amusement. Ah yes, gloves, because nothing betrays guilt like frozen digits. Hodge's imagined glare reminded her that dramatic flair was best paired with precision. Boswell's hypothetical tail flick suggested she keep a sharp eye on reactions. One by one, motives were laid bare. Darcy Somerville for perceived slights and competition over social influence, Mrs. Witherspoon for lingering envy masked by politeness, Mr. Pritchard quietly resentful of Celia's ability to charm without effort, and even Mrs. Harper, whose subtle manipulation had been overlooked until now. Agatha narrated each revelation with a careful mix of irony, wit, and understated severity, letting each accusation float like frost in winter air. The villagers shifted uneasily, eyes darting, hands tightening on handbags or notes, voices lowering in whispered defenses. Agatha noted the micro-expressions, the small tells, flickering eyes, twitching lips, a sudden cough, and catalogued each for later reflection. Celia Montague, Agatha continued, voice low and deliberate, was clever, charming, and, as it happens, extraordinarily good at provoking envy while remaining seemingly innocent. This combination, she paused, letting the sentence linger, created opportunities for misunderstandings, misdirection, and, unfortunately, murder. Gasps and murmurs threaded through the hall.
Agatha smiled faintly, knowing the room was on the precipice. Each suspect's inner narrative had been teased out, and the tension was almost tactile, a frost-chilled electricity between polite smiles and concealed fear. She leaned forward, hands resting lightly on the table. And now, having considered jealousy, fear, and resentment, the question remains, who among us acted on these impulses to bring about Celia's permanent farewell? Silence settled, heavy and expectant. Every eye flickered, every breath was measured. Agatha, satisfied, allowed herself a private, wry thought. Who will crack first? The answer, she knew, would emerge not from accusation alone, but from the delicate, irrefutable reveal of small gestures, emotional fingerprints, and a signature left behind in plain sight. And as the frost outside glimmered stubbornly, Agatha Raisin smiled behind her composed exterior. The climax was near, and the frost would finally break. Agatha Raisin stood in the center of the village hall, notebook closed, but mind razor-sharp. The room held its collective breath. Frosted windows blurred the winter sunlight, giving the scene a dreamlike quality, softened yet tense. Hodge and Boswell were absent, leaving her to savor the moment without feline interference, though their imagined scorn would have made the revelation far more gratifying. "Ladies and gentlemen," Agatha began, voice smooth, lightly ironic, "the threads of envy, jealousy, and subtle fear have woven themselves into a tapestry far more intricate than anyone could have guessed. And yet, as always, the truth lies in observation, small details, emotional fingerprints, and carefully placed misdirections." Eyes flickered, breaths held. Some shifted in their chairs, hands tightening over handbags or clasped together. Agatha allowed the tension to steep, pausing for effect, enjoying the delicate dance of discomfort and anticipation. Celia Montague was not leaving Carsely merely by choice. She was pressured, manipulated, if you will. Someone wanted her gone, quietly, and her polite, charming demeanor masked anxiety and fear. Her farewell, orchestrated to appear serene and celebratory, concealed her desperation. A sharp intake of breath echoed from one corner of the hall. Agatha's gaze, precise and unflinching, rested briefly on the culprit before sweeping the room. The subtle quiver of a lip, the faint narrowing of eyes betrayed recognition, an involuntary acknowledgment that Agatha had already pieced together the mosaic of events. "The individual responsible," Agatha said, letting each word land like frost on a winter branch, "is someone underestimated, overlooked, and admired for their apparent politeness. This person allowed envy, fear of exposure, and simmering resentment to dictate action." A hushed silence followed, thick and expectant. Agatha's eyes met those of Mr. Pritchard for a fraction of a second longer than decorum allowed. The man's hands twitched in his lap, his posture taut with unease. She had watched him carefully, noting micro-expressions during earlier interviews, the subtle hesitation in his speech, the tiny inconsistencies in his account. "The murder," Agatha said, letting each word land like frost on a winter branch, "is someone underestimated, overlooked, and admired for their apparent politeness. This person allowed envy, fear of exposure, and simmering resentment to dictate action." A hushed silence followed, thick and expectant. Agatha's eyes met those of Mr. Pritchard for a fraction of a second longer than decorum allowed. The man's hands twitched in his lap, his posture taut with unease. She had watched him carefully, noting micro-expressions during earlier interviews, the subtle hesitation in his speech, the tiny inconsistencies in his account. "The murder," Agatha said, letting each word land like frost on a winter branch, "was calm, calculated, and designed to appear serene, an artificial peace meant to disguise intent. Celia's body, her neatly arranged hands, the frost-cracked garden paths, the altered scarf, all orchestrated to suggest natural departure, not forced absence." Agatha paused, letting the gravity of the revelation settle. "The motivation was envy and fear,
Fear of being exposed for small misdeeds, of losing social control, of seeing personal ambition eclipsed by someone younger, more charming, more effortlessly admired. The crime was meticulously planned, executed, and camouflaged in tranquility. Murmurs fluttered through the hall, polite gasps mingling with suppressed exclamations. The culprit's face betrayed everything words could not, a mixture of horror at discovery, recognition of the inevitable, and an undeniable sense of inevitability. Agatha allowed a small smile, not cruel, but satisfied. Justice, in this cozy village, required clarity more than punishment. She observed the relief, the shock, and faintly the embarrassment that accompanies exposure of long-hidden envy. And so, Celia Montague's farewell was deadly, not because of passion, not because of rage, but because of quiet calculation and unspoken resentments. The truth hidden beneath politeness and charm has been revealed, and though the frost has masked many things, it could not conceal the emotional signature left behind. She stepped back, allowing the hall to absorb the revelation fully. The villagers, caught between astonishment and understanding, processed the layers of jealousy, fear, and deliberate concealment. Outside, winter sunlight gleamed faintly off frost-laden streets, reflecting a calm restored, cozy, yet forever changed by the clarity of truth. Agatha Raisin, notebook tucked under her arm, allowed herself a final wry thought. Some farewells are truly unforgettable, but justice, when gentle, is the most satisfying warmth of all.
Chapter 8. Thawing Hearts and Warm Kitchens. Agatha Raisin stepped through the familiar wooden door of her Carsely cottage, the faint scent of winter pine and recently swept hearth welcoming her back. Frost still clung stubbornly to window panes, but inside, warmth curled around her like a well-worn blanket. Hodge and Boswell, ever vigilant, met her at the door with pointed stares, tails flicking in unison, as if to announce, "Finally, you're home, and now you will feed us properly." "Ah, my esteemed critics," Agatha said, setting down her coat and shaking off the chill. "I trust the village survived the revelation without causing a ruckus in my absence." Hodge twitched his whiskers, and Boswell yawned expansively, judgment rendered as only cats could deliver. Agatha chuckled, pouring herself a generous cup of tea from the steaming pot already waiting on the kitchen counter. The kettle whistled insistently, a domestic soundtrack contrasting sharply with the tension of the past days. Agatha placed a plate of biscuits beside her cup and fed the cats their carefully measured portions, noting with dry amusement how Hodge batted a morsel towards Boswell, who sniffed it disdainfully before turning away. Even in the mundane, life demanded protocol and performance. Outside, Carsely was thawing quietly. The villagers moved through the morning with tentative calm, snowbanks glinting under weak sunlight. Conversations resumed, polite smiles returned, and gossip shifted once more from speculation about Celia Montague's farewell to more trivial matters. The best seed supplier for spring, which bakery truly excelled in scones, and whether the frost had ruined the hedgerow pruning. Agatha allowed herself a private smile, comforted by the village's resilience. Returning to her own thoughts, she reflected on the events of recent weeks. Jealousy, deceit, calculated danger, and a farewell that had frozen hearts in the cold. Humor helped her process the absurdities, the dramatic faces, the awkward interviews. Her own vanity, always present, had not been spared, imagining her coat in disarray, her scarf askew, and the inevitable judgment of Hodge and Boswell. Yet warmth prevailed. Tea steamed, the fire crackled gently in the grate, and the cats purred with approval, or at least a tacit acceptance of her return. Agatha allowed herself to sink into the comforting repetition of domestic routine, clearing crumbs, arranging cushions, adjusting curtains to catch the weak sunlight, and reflecting on subtle lessons learned. Had she truly moved on? Perhaps not entirely. A faint ache lingered, a combination of nostalgia, unresolved curiosity, and the awareness that human folly never rested. But in this moment, she felt the comforting glow of order restored, of life returning to rhythm, of small pleasures prevailing over chaos. She glanced out the frost-laced window to the village beyond, imagining the soft chatter resuming, the tentative laughter, the cautious trust rebuilding. Her mind, ever alert, noted small inconsistencies, unanswered questions, and hints of future mysteries. After all, peace in Carsely was always temporary, a delightful prelude to the next puzzle. Hodge hopped onto the counter, nudging her hand expectantly. Boswell leapt onto the armchair, tail swishing impatiently. Agatha gave them each a small, indulgent pat, murmuring, "Dinner will be served, and judgment will be rendered, as always." The kitchen, warm and scented with tea and baked biscuits, seemed sanctuary. Outside, frost glimmered on roofs and railings, hinting at lingering chill. But inside, the comforting domesticity restored balance. Agatha Raisin sipped her tea, smiled at her cats, and allowed a brief private chuckle. Life for now had returned to the gentle rhythm of winter mornings, with the promise of mysteries yet to come. And somewhere in the back of her mind, she felt the familiar thrill. A new puzzle always awaited, just beyond the horizon of Carsely's cozy streets.
Agatha Raisin reclined in her armchair, Hodge curled in her lap, Boswell perched elegantly on the windowsill, tail flicking like a pendulum measuring calm. The kitchen was warm, tea steaming gently beside her, biscuits within easy reach. Outside, frost clung reluctantly to rooftops and hedgerows, stubborn in its retreat, while the village of Carsely moved through its first post-crisis morning with careful, polite normality. Life was resuming its cozy rhythm, and Agatha allowed herself a quiet smile. She reflected on the events of the past weeks, jealousy, deceit, the coldly calculated murder, and her own triumph in seeing through the layers of pretense. The frost had melted from the garden, but human envy, she mused, was far less malleable. It lingered like a faint chill in the heart, subtle, persistent, and capable of surfacing when least expected. The village might feel restored, but under polite greetings and cheery chatter, currents of rivalry and desire remained. Hodge, disapproving of her musings, nudged her hand insistently. All right, Agatha said with dry amusement, stroking his fur. Boswell, ever the sentinel, blinked slowly, as if reminding her that observation was never finished. Even in comfort, she remained alert, a habit honed by years of village intrigues. The postman arrived, sliding a small envelope through the letterbox with his usual careful precision. Agatha approached, noting the handwriting, unfamiliar, elegant, and slightly angular. She paused, examining the seal. No stamp, no return address. Her pulse quickened. Curiosity, that familiar companion, nudged her forward. "Who could be writing now?" she muttered, slicing the envelope open with deliberate care. The letter inside was brief, carefully worded, and slightly ominous. "Enjoy your victory, Mrs. Raisin, but frost always returns. Watch the thaw carefully." Agatha read the line twice, savoring the combination of intrigue and understated threat. A chill, not of winter, but of anticipation, raced down her spine. Whoever had sent this letter knew of her recent triumph, observed her investigations, and wished to rattle her composure. Humor flickered as she imagined Hodge rolling his eyes at her dramatic gasp and Boswell arching a brow in silent judgment. Yet beneath the humor, a familiar thrill arose. The letter was a puzzle, an invitation to vigilance, a reminder that life in Carsely, however cozy, was never truly settled. She placed it carefully on the table, making a mental note to trace handwriting, paper, or signature style. Outside, the village stirred under weak sunlight. Children shuffled to school, shopkeepers opened doors, and the occasional dog barked in greeting to familiar passers-by. The world appeared calm, ordinary, and restored, but Agatha knew better. Beneath that frost-melted surface, currents of envy, rivalry, and curiosity lingered, waiting for a spark. She poured herself another cup of tea, the warmth comforting, the aroma familiar. The cats returned their attention, Hodge curling fully against her arm, Boswell stretching across the sill. Agatha allowed herself a quiet sigh of satisfaction, knowing that for now order had returned. Yet the letter's words echoed in her mind. Frost always returns. Carsely would settle, the village would breathe easily, and tea would flow. But Agatha Raisin, ever perceptive, understood that every calm is temporary, every thaw followed by a chill, and that adventures, cozy, intricate, and just a little dangerous, were always waiting just around the corner. She smiled faintly, glancing at Hodge and Boswell. "Well," she said softly, "it seems winter has more to teach us yet. Shall we wait and see?" The cats responded with purrs and flicked tails, their silent approval a reminder that the warmth of home could coexist with curiosity about the unknown. For now, Carsely rested, but in the shadows of polite facades and frost-glimmering rooftops, a new chill had begun to whisper, and Agatha Raisin, ever vigilant, was ready.